Yes, Rahul, you can start.
Namaskar and greetings of the day to one and all. Welcome to the 21st Foundation Day celebration of NCPOR. It has been a journey of 21 successful years when the Department of Ocean Development, now the Ministry of Earth Sciences, had entrusted us to undertake one of the ambitious endeavors to ensure India's influential presence in the polar regions. We are also celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav on the occasion of 75 years of independence, which will be celebrated throughout the year till 2022. I would now like to invite Dr. M. Ravichandran, Director of NCPOR, to give his welcome address.
Respected Dr. M. Rajivan, Secretary to Government of India, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Professor Stephen Chow, Professor of Biological Sciences, Monash University, Melbourne, and also the Director of Securing Antarctica's Environmental Future Project, and also past President of Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, Director of MOS institutions, scientists from MOES and its institutions, my colleagues and friends from NCPOR, and all those who participated this virtual meet. A very good morning to all of you. Though we could not meet physically, but I'm happy that we are able to join virtually. First, thanks to Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences for accepting our invitation, and it is really honor for us. Your presence is valuable and it is really motivate us for doing much more than what we do. I welcome you, sir, for this program. I also thank Professor Stephen for readily agreeing to deliver Foundation Day lecture on collaborative international Antarctic research and our coming future. His contribution to Antarctic science is well known, and as a president of SCAR, during last 5 years, he played a pivotal role in shaping SCAR. I welcome Stephen for this virtual meet. Today we are 21 years old. Though the Indian Antarctic program started in the year 1981 as an Antarctic study center, later grown as a separate autonomous institute under Department of Ocean Development, now Ministry of Earth Sciences, in the year 2000. Considering the importance of all three poles, Antarctica, Arctic, and Himalaya, and its surrounding oceans, the name has been changed to National Center for Polar and Ocean Research in the year 2018. The mandate of NCPOR is twofold: polar science in all three poles, and ocean science, mainly survey and exploration of non-living resources. I sincerely thank who have contributed to the growth of NCPOR, especially past secretaries of DOD, right from Dr. Kasim, Professor Gaur, Dr. Muthanayagam, Dr. Kasgupta, Dr. Goyal, and Dr. Sailesh Naik, and the present secretary, Dr. M. Rajivan. Also the past directors of NCPOR, Professor Pandey, Dr. Rasik Ravindra, Dr. Rajan, and employees of DOD and Ministry of Earth Sciences, present employees and students of NCPOR, all Antarctic veterans and colleagues from participating institutions, and most importantly, colleagues and friends in our Antarctic stations and our research vessels. I wish all NCPOR colleagues a happy Foundation Day. Last year, we have faced a lot of challenges due to COVID, especially to execute our field programs. Some we have dropped it and some we could execute it. We could successfully execute our Antarctic expedition from Goa instead of from Cape Town, South Africa, with all COVID protocol. After completing its task in both stations, now the vessel is on the way to Cape Town. Maybe by next week, it will reach Cape Town. We could do minimum field activities in Himalaya, but unfortunately, we could not execute Arctic and Southern Ocean program due to COVID. In the ocean survey and exploration, we could recover all the ocean bottom seismometers without much assistance from Germany engineers, and all OBS successfully recovered. Though the field activities were reduced in the year 2020-21, but I am extremely happy to inform that NCPOR could publish 30% more publication than the last year and almost 3 times more than 5 years back. Also, the quality of publication has significantly increased, and most of the publications are well in reputed journals. One way, COVID has provided an opportunity for us to look at the data, analyze them, and produce more science. I sincerely thank all my colleagues for the same and look forward to see such growth in the coming years. Coming years, we have a lot of agenda in hand, apart from our regular expeditions and science program, especially in Antarctica. We have to start the ice core drilling in collaboration with the UK and Norway, and also geological exploration of Amiri Ice Cell project and sea ice variability and teleconnection between poles and tropics. And we also need to augment our long-awaited polar research vessels, which we need to start. We have to build this same in the coming years. And also we have to start our Maitri station renovation or the new building of Maitri stations. And also Antarctic will need to be tabled in the parliament in the coming years. In 2022, we also planned for SCAR 2022 in Hyderabad. Of course, Professor Stephen is the chair of the International Scientific Organizing Committee to spearhead these scientific programs. As you all know that we also got the main mission, Deep Ocean mission. Under that, we are going to execute the hydrothermal program, and also we want to build the new research vessels in the coming years. In the Arctic, though we have only our research activities is mainly concentrated on Svalbard, but now we are negotiating with the other countries, especially Canada, Sweden, and Denmark, to do some collaborative work in Arctic, and especially to contribute sustained Arctic observation network, and also sea ice modeling, biodiversity, and one of the ambitious project of ancient eDNA and marine litter and so on. And Southern Ocean, I think we are planning for enhance the observational capability by deploying new automated instruments such as mooring and gliders, and also this will be part of our contribution to UN Decade of the Ocean Sciences. In Himalaya, we will be looking at focus on snow and thickness of the glaciers, GLOVE and hydrological modeling effort. And also in the ocean science, we are going to deploy more OBS, and also International Ocean Discovery Program, we are planning to drill in Andaman areas. And from the administration side, in the infrastructure, we are already building new buildings, a container yard and extension of lab block and polar lab. I think this will provide more space, especially for the students and the project and regular scientists. We need to strengthen our international collaborations in the coming years. Also, the administration point of view, we have almost all the things we made ERPs, everything in electronic, ERPs, SAP, e-procurement, GEM, all these things we have automated. And now I think we are very seamlessly, we are going through all the administration process. I feel proud of our colleagues for accomplishing the task, whatever entrusted on us with available resources. I am sure Secretary Ministry of Earth Sciences will consider and push government for getting more manpower for NCPOR. We need to strengthen our team, and also we need to collaborate with our research institutions within India as well as abroad. I always quote the Zig Ziglar words, difficult roads are often lead to beautiful destinations. The best is yet to come. Thank you very much for joining, and I once again welcome you all for the NCPOR Foundation Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravichandran, for your kind words and highlighting and briefing about NCPOR and the road ahead. I would now request our chief guest for today, Dr. M. Rajivan, Secretary to the Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India, to share a few words with the community. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Stephen Shawn, former president of SCAR, Dr. M. Ravichandran, director of NCPOR, Dr. Rahul Mohan, dear scientists, staff, project scientists of NCPOR, colleagues from MOES and other institutions of MOES. Very good morning and good afternoon to all of you. First of all, thank you, Professor Stephen, for kindly agreeing to deliver the Foundation Day lecture and participating in this NCPOR Foundation Day. I should really congratulate all of you for the 21st NCPOR Foundation Day. All of you should be very proud of your achievement, and you should also celebrate today. On this day, we should also remember the significant contributions done by past directors, scientists, and staff of NCPOR with all gratitude. The National Center for Polar and Ocean Research was established in May 1998, 25th May 1998, as an autonomous research institute of Ministry of, at that time it was Ocean Development, Department of Ocean Development. Now it is Ministry of Earth Sciences. So they have three major components of work: Arctic, Antarctic, Himalayan Cryosphere, and South Indian Ocean Program. In addition to that, they also do a lot of research. NCPOR does a lot of research on countries. He is a survey of basically geoscientific survey of countries. He said CLCS and deep sea drilling in the Arabian Sea, which they've done it with the help from IODP, and also expansion of ocean living resources such as gas hydrates and multi-metal sulfates in mid-ocean ridges. NCPOR for the past few years has achieved significant achievements in terms of research and development with very limited resources. I want to congratulate all of you for this great achievement. Last year, due to COVID, NCPOR could not launch Arctic and South Indian Ocean expeditions, but however, they managed the Antarctic expedition exceptionally very well. The NCPOR will play an important role in India's Arctic policy, which is, as all of you know, is being brought out by Government of India, and especially on science aspects. And we are also expanding to new areas, starting from Canada, and also we have a collaboration. Now we are starting a collaboration with Denmark and Sweden. I'm very sure that India's scientific expedition to Arctic will continue and will be further strengthened. Ministry is also seriously considering the institution of an Arctic science ambassador or counselor for Arctic matters, because Government of India is very seriously considering pushing the Arctic policy. As far as Himalayan science is concerned, we have a research station, Himansh in Chandra Basin, and last 5-6 years we have been doing a lot of work, and good results have come up. But we also, especially in view of Chamoli incident, which has happened recently, NCPOR's role will be more important in the coming years, and they have to play an important role in terms of understanding the glacier dynamics. So NCPOR need to enhance the activities on glaciers and the complex dynamics. Government of India is basically discussing now an integrated approach for a multi-hazard early warning system for trans-Himalayas. So NCPOR will be play an important role and will be an important institution to lead this initiative. And as far as research in Antarctica is concerned, it's going well. Every year, it's more and more new research areas are being identified, and more people are getting involved, except for this year because of this COVID. I understand more collaborations with countries like Norway also is happening. And NCPOR is also planning for a deep ice core drilling up to 500 meters in Antarctica in coming days. And we have 2-3 important agenda points which are pending for many years, and Ministry is very serious about this. One is of replacement of Maitri Station. It is almost more than 30 years old now. So we need a replacement for Maitri Station and procurement of polar research vessel. I request about the items we should push it, and Director Ravichandran will have to move all those important files to Ministry, and Ministry also will be playing an important role to push this. Two cases. One is replacement of Maitri Station and polar research vessels. And Dr. Ravichandran also was mentioning about Antarctica bill. It's true that we have been discussing this Antarctica bill for the last 2-3 years. I am very sure this year this bill will be passed in the Parliament, and as we expected. And I see NCPOR scientists also bringing a lot of very high quality papers because they have a lot of young scientists, bright young scientists, and they are bringing a lot of good research papers, high quality research papers in very reputed journals on different aspects of polar and ocean science. I request all of you to keep publishing good papers, and in terms of new ideas and new results from both from Arctic, Antarctica, as well as Himalaya, and as well as South Indian Ocean expeditions. NCPOR is, as all of us know, that's a relatively younger organization of MOES, and there's a great hope for the expansion of research work and related to polar and ocean sciences. I appreciate the need and for more and more trained manpower, and also research funds for NCPOR. As Secretary of MOES, I assure you all of you full support from the Ministry for further strengthening of research activities of NCPOR, and we will pursue with the Government of India for getting more trained manpower as well as more research funds for NCPOR. With this, I'll stop here. Wish you all the best. Do well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your address and the encouraging words, pushing us to excel further. And thanks a lot for addressing NCPOR community and the polar community in general. I have another job to do, that is each year on the occasion of Foundation Day, NCPOR felicitates NCPOR researchers, scientists for the best publication. In the year 2019-20, we had 10 nominations, and in the year 2020-21, we received 11 nominations. These were published in various peer-reviewed journals by NCPOR colleagues as lead author. The paper has to be from NCPOR taking the lead. There can be other authors as well. Although it is difficult to compare papers from different science disciplines, but to encourage scientists and to further the ability of scientists to do further well, one best paper is chosen each year. Each peer-reviewed paper is an important contribution for the growth of science. However, everyone cannot be a winner, but there is always a next time. The Research Advisory Council has been doing this job for NCPOR, and we would like to place on record our thanks to them. They have selected one paper for 2019-20 and another paper for 2020-21. And may I now request Dr. M. Rajivan, Secretary to Government of India, Ministry of Earth Sciences, to please announce the best paper awards. Dr. Rajivan, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I should congratulate Dr. Ravichandran for instituting these awards for the NCPOR employees for selecting best paper for each year. I am extremely happy to announce these awards, two awards, one for 1920 and another is 2021. The best paper for the year 1920 is Increased Influence of ENSO on Antarctica Temperature Since the Industrial Era by Rahman W. Chatterjee, Visaj, Kamban, published in Nature Scientific Reports. The best paper for the year 2021 is Enhanced Dust Influx to South Atlantic sector of Antarctica during the late 20th century, Causes and Contribution to Radiative Forcing by Lalu Raj, Rahman, Kamban, Srivastava R, published in Journal of Geophysical Research Atmosphere. So hearty congratulations to all of you for these awards for best paper for 2019-20 and 2021. But keep doing good work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Rajivan, sir. And of course, congratulations to the lead authors, Dr. Waliur Rahman and CM Lalu Raj, for their best paper awards. Appreciation to all the nominees of the award for their hard work and for carrying out the best possible research in their domain. Just to inform the winners, the cash prize and the citation will be given in due course of time. So winners have to wait maybe a couple of hours or days as well. So congratulations to all. Thank you so much. So we move on from the awards to the Foundation Day speaker and the lecture. To mark the 21st Foundation Day celebration, as you all know by now, we have a special guest, a renowned scientist, Professor Stephen L. Chow, who is with us to deliver the NCPOR Foundation Day lecture entitled Collaborative International Antarctic Research and Our Coming Future. Although many of you know Professor Stephen, however, it is my proud privilege and duty to introduce the speaker for the NCPOR Foundation Day lecture. An outstanding researcher and an immediate past president of the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, he has been an advisor to the Antarctic Treaty System. Stephen Chow is a professor of biological sciences in Monash University, Australia, and director of Securing Antarctica's Environmental Future, an Australian Research Council special research initiative. His early education in Pretoria, South Africa, and obtained his PhD degree on the ecology and systematics of subantarctic weevils from the University of Pretoria way back in 1989. Professor Chown is a widely published and cited authority on the invasive species and the effect of climate change and human interactions on Antarctica. He has keen interest in the science policy interface and contributed substantially to the Antarctic conservation policy. With more than 30 years of field experience, he has worked in Australia, Africa, the Pacific, the UK, and in the broader Antarctic region. He established and was the director of South African National Center for Excellence for Invasion Biology. Of course, he has many awards and honors, which include the inaugural recipient of the Martha T. Muse Award for 2009 for Science and Policy in Antarctica, the award ceremony for which I was personally privileged to be present. The SCAR Medal for Excellence in Antarctic Research, the South African Antarctic Gold Medal, and many more in his CV. He's an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a fellow of the Royal Society of South Africa. Professor Chown has published more than 380 peer-reviewed papers in science and different journals, several books and popular articles on Antarctic region as lead and co-lead of many projects on climate change Antarctica. Currently, he resides in Melbourne, Australia, and may now request Professor Stephen Chown to deliver his Foundation Day lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul, for that very generous and kind introduction. And it is also a pleasure to have known you for so long, in fact, reflecting on some of the time we've spent together at several meetings. Secretary to the Ministry of Earth Sciences, Dr. M. Rajivan, Director of NCPOR, Dr. Ravichandran, colleagues interested in Antarctica, and delightfully, the winners of the Best Paper Awards. It's indeed a great pleasure and a privilege to be with you today for your 21st Foundation Day and to present this lecture. I think I should probably start by saying happy birthday, since it's your 21st birthday, and 21st birthdays are always very special. And of course, congratulations also on the 75th anniversary for India. These are really important times for all of us. And in fact, that brings me to the presentation that I will share with you today. And that is really thinking about where we stand currently and what our future holds for us, in particular in an Antarctic context. It's of course quite a simple matter to speak of our coming future, but a little more difficult to explain what we'll deal with. So as a quick guide, I'll stop by Antarctica's global significance. We'll spend some time on changes in the region, have a look at the challenges for our responses, both globally and regionally, and then touch on collaborative research, especially in a SCAR context, but also, of course, in a domestic context, because that, after all, is one of the main reasons we're all in the polar regions, but in particular in the Antarctic. So to begin with, it's no news to anyone that we're facing really quite difficult times as a planet. That's probably best reflected by the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you just think of why they're there, one immediately comes to an understanding of our difficulties. So for example, we know that we are struggling to provide clean water and sanitation in many places. Poverty remains a global problem. We have difficulties with a very rapidly changing climate. Conservation is not always as strong as it should be, although we're taking many steps to do so. And of course, one can also look at the headlines or the covers of various international magazines to see that it's not unknown, and it is actually of major concern to society, the fact that things are not perhaps going as well as they should. And they're not going as well as they should, not only for the cities that we now typically occupy, since most people now live in cities and will continue to do so into the future, but also for the life that sustains us, as illustrated by these various pictures of forms of biodiversity from various different places on the planet. So when we think of these challenges, of course, often Antarctica is very remote from our thoughts. But of course, Antarctica is right there in the midst of all these difficulties that we're facing. And the primary reason, of course, is because the ice sheet has such a massive contribution to make to sea level change. So if one looks at a range of recent publications, and if one relies on the recent IPCC, a special report on ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate, we know that there's a prediction under current scenarios, if we don't take some mitigation steps, of about 1.2 meters sea level rise by 2100. But importantly, it's worth considering that there's also a 5% chance of up to 2 meters sea level rise. These are very substantial increases in sea level that will have dramatic effects across the planet. Of course, these effects will not be felt just in Antarctica, but will, of course, be felt around the planet, depending also, of course, where that most of the ice melt takes place. For example, there's quite a different distribution, initially anyway, of sea level rise if the Greenland ice sheet were to melt first relative to, say, for example, the West Antarctic ice sheet. We know that there's a great deal of science going on about this question. This is a piece of work that appeared just last year, and late last year in September, showing that we can expect from these models, with a 1 degree increase in temperature, about 1.6 meters of sea level rise equivalent. And so you can see all the way through to much larger consequences for us under very different scenarios. And amazingly, from the perspective of the science of determining what would happen to both the West and East Antarctic ice sheets, is this paper that was published by Bamba and colleagues in PNAS just almost a year before that, with the finding that expert uncertainty has in fact grown a little because of the uncertainty of ice dynamics effects. And their suggestion was in fact that 5% probability of 2 meters should actually be included in local and regional planning purposes. And these are matters that arise right at the local level, so right down to the council level, if particular councils are trying to figure out how they should deal with planning for local housing, local business and so on in coastal areas. So it's very clear that there's a great deal of need for work to try to reduce this uncertainty so that we can plan better for the future of society everywhere. To give you an illustration of what this actually means, this is some work taken from Scott Coop and colleagues' paper published in Nature Communications in 2019. And what they were doing is they were improving the digital elevation models that we all use for understanding how high land is above sea level. So for those of you who are expert in this area, you'll know that up until their paper was published, most digital elevation models stopped at the top of trees or the tops of buildings in some areas and actually didn't get down the few extra meters in certain places. Their revision of the global digital elevation model made a huge change to the numbers of people experiencing annual flooding by 2050. That is the forecasts. And their forecasts, India is listed as the third most significant change of an increase, even without taking into consideration additional melt from the Antarctic ice sheet, was a change from 5 million in the original projections up to 36 million. And you can see the numbers for the other top 6 listed over there. So there are really some substantial threats to particularly the Indo-Pacific region from changing sea levels. So actually understanding what the future is of the West and East Antarctic ice sheets, and in NCPOR's case, of course, the interest in the Arctic is extremely important. Of course, we tend to think of all of these things only in terms of our human livelihoods, but some work a colleague and I did, published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, indicated that protected areas such as national parks that are in coastal regions could lose large proportions of their area as a consequence of sea level change. So not only do you have changes to terrestrial systems, but illustrated in the image to the left below, one also has substantial changes to estuaries that are important, for example, for breeding of marine and freshwater fish and other ecosystem services. So it's not only ourselves that will be impacted directly, but also the protected areas that represent often the last strongholds of the species that we share the planet with. And of course, we can see that there may be additional difficulties too. So I'll keep the movie running. I hope you can see it. But, you know, we have substantial difficulties also coming from migration. And most of that migration actually has to do with domestic issues rather than international ones. And with sea level rise, we have a potentially very large indirect effect that we may have to deal with in coming years, making our addressing of these sustainable development goals really quite complicated. So those are the impacts we might feel as society everywhere on the globe. But of course, they'll also be felt in the Antarctic. We know, for example, from a range of works that have come out in the recent literature, that there's surface warming of the continent, especially in the west, and particularly along the Antarctic Peninsula. There's a clear signal of anthropogenic warming now in the Southern Ocean. This is some work done by Swart and colleagues in Nature Geoscience showing that ocean warming is detectable with a human influence. We know that the way Antarctic sea ice is changing is not very predictable. It was increasing, then it had this major decline and is now back up closing in on long-term means. And of course, we know from several works that ice mass is declining. These all have implications for the local environment. If we start on marine systems, then we have actually had some really good work demonstrating both impacts already and expectations into the future. So this work by Angus Atkinson and colleagues showed for krill, which of course is of significant interest to international fisheries, has moved south tremendously based on work that's been done in this region. It's the data that has the longest time series for krill anywhere. So around the time the Antarctic Treaty came into force, or a bit before then, between 1926 and 1939, there was a great deal of krill activity centered around the island of South Georgia, a bit less so on the western Antarctic Peninsula. In the 1976 to 1995 period, this was the period when SCAR and international Antarctic programs were running the biomass programs. Krill had actually already started moving towards the west of the Antarctic Peninsula with a little less focus on South Georgia. And over the last 2 decades, between 1996 and 2016, you can see that the mean latitude for krill in this region has declined substantially, with much less krill availability around South Georgia and in this particular region here, but a great increase along the western Antarctic Peninsula. So we've already seen substantial changes that can be attributed, at least in this paper by Atkinson and others, to changing environments in the region. We also know, this is some work by Mike Dunn and colleagues from the United Kingdom, that reflects Antarctic Peninsula region changes with declines in Adelie penguins. Adelie is not doing too badly in the rest of Antarctica, of course, many of you will know, but on the peninsula there's more or less a replacement with these Antarctic sea ice dependent species like Adelies and Gentus declining, and Gentoo penguins actually increasing quite substantially. These sorts of biodiversity changes have been recorded elsewhere too. So this is the French island of Île aux Cochons, the island of the pigs, where there was a major king penguin colony, very well known for its significant numbers. And this work by Henri Weimerskirch, Peter Ryan and colleagues, you can see the declines from 1982, where the original colony was. It's been revegetated now as the penguins have actually stopped expanding into these areas, and we now have a substantial decline in the numbers of king penguins on Île aux Cochons, one of the biggest breeding colonies in the world. And this work by Stéphanie Genevieve and colleagues has also shown with forecast models what the situation will be like for emperor penguins, the most significant of the penguins, at least from a well-known popular perspective. So Stephanie's work has demonstrated that the situation today means that with no action, we'll see 80% extinction of populations by 2100. If we meet a 2-degree agreement, 31%, and a 1.5 agreement, it goes down to 19%. So our actions today will have tremendous influence on what goes on in the Antarctic region into the future. And finally, I just draw some attention to work by Mark Dell and a wide range of colleagues done through one of SCAR's programs on retrospective analysis of Antarctic tracking data, so showing some models of ecologically significant systems around the Antarctic. These circles that you see here are in fact marine protected areas that have either been declared around national areas. This is Heard Island of Australia. This is and Île-Kerguelen of France. This is the Possession Island archipelago, Île-Crozet of France, and this is the Prince Edward Islands of South Africa. There's South Georgia, and you can recognize the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area here. The green means changes in these ecologically significant areas, and there's substantial southwards shift in many areas, showing that as climate changes, we'll actually lose the efficacy of some of our marine protected areas. So how these are established into the future and whether we can have the dynamism in our policy responses to deal with that is of course extremely important from a marine perspective. Just showing, you know, this is one of the best examples of large-scale international collaborative research that's enabled the drawing together of all of this tracking information from these 12 species or so. In fact, there are probably a few more, but simply illustrating that if you bring together data in international scenarios, one can come up with a great deal of information about how life might change in the region and what policy responses there should be. Terrestrial systems in the Antarctic, the broader Antarctic region, thinking about also some of those surrounding subantarctic islands, are changing in different ways too, and we have some good evidence for that. Probably the best way to show some of the change is simply through a visual illustration. So I was fortunate enough to work with the British Antarctic Survey in 1994 and in 2014 with a group there again, exactly 20 years apart, and almost to the day when I took these different photographs, to the day in December in the summer season. This is Gulbrandsen Lake and the Neumayer Glacier in 1994, and you can see the substantial retreat of the glacier. You can just focus on this peak, for example, and make the comparison across them. There's the same peak again in the two images, with tremendous retreat of these subantarctic glaciers, showing that there's been a very substantial increase in the heat content of the Southern Ocean, leading to, of course, these substantial glacial retreats. Critical when thinking, of course, about the continent itself is that the continent is very diverse. It has a very wide diversity of landscapes and ecosystems, from East Antarctica, of course, to the McMurdo Dry Valleys, to the Peninsula region, for example. And we know that there's some different forecasts, at least over the short term, within the next 30 or 40 years or so, with a warmer, wetter peninsula, a bit of a cooler, windier, drier East Antarctica, depending a lot on what happens to the ozone hole, change relative to growing global climate change due to anthropogenic production of greenhouse gases. But we already have information on change. So, for example, this work by Matthew Amesbury and colleagues published in Current Biology shows the tremendous increase in microbial productivity, in growth rate of mosses and the accumulation rate of material, comparing, say, the 1850s through to the 2010s. So you can see the significant upturn in rates around about the 1960s or so across all three of these particular illustrations. So we're having a tremendous impact on terrestrial systems in the peninsula region, for example. There's something of a different response in East Antarctica. This is work published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution by, I think, Nature Climate Change, my mistake, sorry, by Sharon Robinson and colleagues, showing that these wet Antarctic specialists, typically the case between 1982 and 2000, very stable system. But then, since then, with an increase in winds and drying of systems, these globally common species of moss have been replacing the wet specialists in the area. And in fact, this is an ongoing process, and one's seeing total turnover of communities. And my colleagues that work elsewhere often say, well, you know, you have a few moss changes, what's the difference? And I point out it would be the same, for example, if you were working in Africa, if you lost a whole savanna and replaced it with semi-desert. So it is worth our while trying to draw these analogies to our colleagues who are not used to working in Antarctic ecosystems. We also have interesting cases of new species colonizing the region, especially in the peninsula. You can see the little red areas indicating the higher probabilities here. To date, we've recorded grasses, midges, springtails, which are small soil invertebrates, nematodes, and other worms that have colonized these areas. And we know there's a high probability of this continuing into the future. And of course, from the expectations from the subantarctic, if we continue to see a lot of warming along the peninsula, we can expect to see flowering weeds like dandelions, additional insects, and of course there's new records coming in every year. And we may even find that the peninsula becomes hospitable to groups of organisms like rodents. So if you do the modeling and you look at the climatic niche of these particular species, then you find that they in the future may well be able to gain a foothold. And again, it's often a question of an explanation to those who are not aware of the impacts of species from elsewhere on ecosystems that are naive to them. One has to really spend some time explaining just the significant changes that can occur. Because if you say there are a few grasses or midges or springtails come in, and it's often very abstract concept for people to get their minds around. But the subantarctic provides us with a very useful example, and that useful example comes from accidental rodent introductions. So for many years, working on rodent introductions, the rodents mostly consumed indigenous insects, but over many years now they've depleted insect populations. And I hope all of you that are watching have a strong stomach, because the next images are not especially pleasant ones. As the rodents have depleted the amount of insect food available to them, they've made a tremendous switch in their diet. So these species have switched from eating insects to actually feeding on live albatross chicks. So the albatrosses are naive to these animals. They've never encountered them before, and the mice simply eat the birds alive. You can see the tremendous damage that's affected, and this has, of course, now been a source of great concern. There are massive eradication programs underway. There's one currently on the more northerly Gough Island that's underway, and there are others planned. There was one, of course, on Macquarie Island that eradicated rabbits, mice, and rats. As a consequence, that was a $25 million program. So prevention is completely better than cure. It sounds like one of those old statements, but it's actually really true for the work that we do in the Antarctic. So the kinds of biosecurity protocols that you may be used to, washing boots, checking your clothing, and those sorts of things are really worth it. Of course, the question to ask is, well, what do we do about all of this? It can be quite a gloomy picture if one paints it that way. But there's no reason at all to be gloomy about this, I think. I think when you know what a problem is, and your science is telling you exactly what the future holds if you continue along a pathway, then it's a much easier argument to present to everyone to say we actually need to take some action. So we know from the Paris 2015 Climate Change Conference and the Paris Agreement that the nationally determined contributions have to be upheld to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and that as a group of nations across the world, our target is to get our CO2, our greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 especially, to net zero by 2040. There's a bit more time available possibly, but if we get it to 2040, the special report for 1.5 degree world indicates that that's the best chance for us. So that's quite a stretch target. Those of you who are aware of the way your economies operate in different places will understand that this is a substantial target for us to reach, but it's very heartening to see the enormous strides being made towards, of course, renewables, change in the way we live, and so on. Governments are very serious about this and have become ever more serious quite quickly. The regional perspective comes, of course, out from the Antarctic Treaty and the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty. And for those scientists who haven't spent much time looking at the policy documents of the Antarctic Treaty, actually both documents are really worth a read. They're not very long. They're quite digestible. In fact, the treaty is one of the shortest treaties you'll ever read, but it's a very beautiful piece of lawmaking, because essentially what it does is it sets Antarctica aside for peace and science, and that's certainly true also of the protocol, which acknowledges that the Antarctic should be comprehensively protected. So Article 2 is well worth reading of the protocol, which says, of course, it designates Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. And these two pieces of international lawmaking actually determine our presence in Antarctica, and also provide very powerful tools to work together in collaborations, scientific collaborations, and also to work together to the benefit of the continent, and of course to understand how it might impact the rest of the world. Of course, there are a few challenges to these agreements, these international and domestic agreements. So I always keep an eye open for the World Energy Outlook, for the executive summary, which is free online. And of course, it's the best document as far as I'm concerned to read about where our energy futures are heading. So if you read the document, you'll see that steps are being taken at a great speed, but we still have quite a lot to get done. So the current model used by the International Energy Agency, it's called their STEPS model, suggests that we're still looking at 36 gigatons of emissions in 2030. So there's some work to be done, but my view is that the change is so quick that we'll see a lot of this addressed. We simply have to face the fact that if we don't change, this is where we'll end up. And from an Antarctic perspective, we also have challenges. The red here, you might think that the red plotted on this graph is in fact ice-free area. What it is actually is human presence over since the beginning. So these are records between 1819 and 2018. And this is work done by a PhD student of mine. And I would like to recommend to all the PhD students that might be listening in, you can do fantastic work, and it can be really well done with the people you're collaborating with. So always bear that in mind. Rachel is an outstanding student. She put this work together showing where we've been as far as we can tell, and of course acknowledging that we may not have every record. This is probably the areas where we still haven't been as people across the continent, although we know that some traverses were going to go through this area in particular. But we do understand that we have growing impacts, and we have to manage this balance between our science, what we like to do, some tourism, of course, because there's tourism to the Antarctic, and what we'd like to protect. But the great thing about collaborative international research is we can look our problems and our challenges square in the face and say, what science do we need? Not only what applied science, of course, but what fundamental science. Because if you think of the ice sheet, for example, a lot of the fundamental physics is actually really critical to understanding what's going to happen into the future. The best way to get on with this is, of course, to acknowledge that in the Antarctic world, and I appreciate that the NCPOR is a polar research organization, but speaking from an Antarctic perspective, SCI provides this tremendous vehicle to take science through to policymakers and others, both in the Antarctic context. This is the logo of the Antarctic Treaty. There's CAMELA, our colleagues from COMNAP that help support us, IATO, that's the Antarctica Tour Operators Association, and NGOs, as well as, of course, to the United Nations decision makers. So we have a tremendously fantastic position to be able to speak with a clear science-based voice to both sets of decision makers. And to do so, SCI has recently announced 3 scientific research programs, and these are really critical, I think, for the coming challenges that we'll face. The first is called INSTANT, as its acronym. It's Instabilities and Thresholds in Antarctica. It really is about what's going to happen to the Antarctic ice sheet and sea level rise. It's a fantastic program. These programs are open to anybody who wants to be part of them, whether you're a PhD student or a researcher who's very well established in their career. You can simply write the informations on the SCI webpage and you can join these programs. The second is about Antarctic climate variability. Of course, this has a role on the ice sheets too, but also on ecosystems. So that's a key area of work. Again, this one is looking on timescales of years to decades with an integrated approach. And importantly, this is not only critical for understanding the future of the area, but also, of course, for understanding how we can improve weather forecasts, which are critical to operational matters in the Antarctic. As all of you will know, I think we were just talking earlier about difficulties in weather and a few other things in the region. And finally, the last program is one that has to do with conservation in the Antarctic. So both marine conservation and terrestrial conservation. And it's really science to try to inform what we might have to do in the face of coming change and how we can actually communicate the likely outcomes of that change, both to influence mitigation, to try to ensure we hit that net zero by 2040, and of course adaptation. If we aren't able to do so, what steps do we have to take in terms of protected areas and so on to ensure that we're able to have a well-conserved Antarctic environment? These programs are a great collaborative way to do research. They are very helpful. They enable one to make contact with the very best people in the world and to make your contributions as great scientists. And they'll run for the next 8 years, more or less. They have a 4+4 term, so there's a midterm review. But in the past, SCAR's programs have all turned out very well in the midterm reviews, and I have great expectations that these will as well. So just some concluding notes. The way forward, in my view, is a way, in fact, that you're celebrating today with your 21st anniversary and your foundation day, and that is excellent science. I saw 2 groups being rewarded for their science excellence. Of course, they runners up who also have done great work. And increasing numbers of research papers and good research is a fantastic way to keep us understanding our world and ensuring that we're able to take decisions to affect it. Not only is National Antarctic Program research such as that done through by the National Centre for Polar and Ocean Research critical, but international collaboration via big programs, whether they be through SCAR, whether they be through WCRP or others, is absolutely critical for our future. And then it doesn't always come easily to everyone, but it's important to bear in mind when your research has finally come out. The excellence is the first step, but clear communication of outcomes to policy is really important. And that's, of course, where organizations such as the NCPOR can be of assistance. Clear communication of outcomes to policy domestically, in this case, of course, India, but also the opportunity to engage in international evidence-based policy environments, whether those of the Antarctic Treaty System, such as the treaty itself, or CAMELA from a marine perspective, as well as the United Nations. So it could be in the Framework Convention on Climate Change, or through the IPCC, or through the work that the Sustainable Development Goals are doing. So with that, a few thanks. I'm not going to work through all of these names. It's just an acknowledgement that international science is done by international scientists, published by international outlets, and we rely on our good colleagues for their generous contributions, and I certainly have here. This is by no means a presentation that has simply come from myself. It's been influenced by many, many interactions. And of course, I have a research group, as do many others, and the research group is the first port of call. It's the first group of people I test anything on. I'm very grateful for their support, and of course the support of the Australian Research Council through our new program, SAFE, the Australian Antarctic Program. And finally, I have to thank my colleagues, and especially Dr. Ravichandran in SCAR for their tremendous encouragement and support. And finally, colleagues, to you for your attention today. So thank you very much. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Professor Stephen, for a wonderful, wonderful lecture. So it's my privilege now to propose the vote of thanks for today. We are drawing the curtains down for the 21st, but a lot needs to be done on the NCPOR front. So we may be 21 years younger, probably. I would say, I would not say 21 years old. I'd say 21 years younger. Thank you, Professor Stephen Chown. It's a privilege on behalf of NCPOR to express our heartfelt thanks to you for a wonderful lecture, enlightening us on how international collaborations have paved the way for path-breaking science in Antarctica. Your talk was really interesting, where it showed the consequences and the changes that have happened in Antarctica over time, as also, importantly, the invasive species and how the rodents in the subantarctic islands created a huge issue as well. And probably the caption line, "Prevention is better than cure," is for all to remember for all times. A big thank you, Stephen, for agreeing to give this lecture at a very short notice. I'm sure through this lecture, and I'm hopeful that we can probably stitch a collaboration between Monash and NCPOR in the longer run. Well, it's my privilege to extend our sincere thanks to Dr. M. Rajivan, Secretary to Government of India, Ministry of Earth Sciences, for sparing time from his busy schedule. Your presence is always motivating and encourages us to perform better. We look forward for your continued guidance, sir. Thanks to Dr. M. Ravichandran for his continued cooperation and support. This program of today was not possible without him and his support. I would also like to express my gratitude to the organizing team, which includes Avinash, Swati, our IT department led by Sri Sami, Lalit, Nixon, and other team members for their cooperation. Thanks also to the entire team of Learning Resource Center and Seminar Committee for coordinating the Best Paper Award. Thanks to all those at NCPOR who have contributed in making this event successful, and each one of you at NCPOR for taking NCPOR to greater heights. It's NCPOR staff who deserve all the applause, your hard work, whichever work you accomplish. You are truly a trans-hemispheric organization. Last but not the least, many thanks to our wonderful audience who have taken their time out to attend the Foundation Day celebration. For all those who might have missed for some reason, for internet connectivity or others, the recording of today's lecture will be uploaded on NCPOR YouTube channel with a kind request to Professor Stephen. And thanks to all of you who have joined, with special thanks to Professor Stephen. And be safe and stay blessed. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Stephen.
It's a great
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you.